Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board. We will begin our meeting with a roll call. Before we begin, we do have ASL interpretation, and please pin either Megan or Chad's screen to follow along. Lena Andrews. Oliver Beasley.
Here.
Dr. Jamil Bey. Joanna Deming. Knowledge Build Hudson. Jerome Jackson.
Here.
Council President Teresa Kale Smith. Mark Masterson.
Here.
James Myers. Paul Spradley.
Here.
Sonia Tillman. Derek Tillman.
Here.
Diamante Walker.
Here.
Adrian Wona. I'm present. And Megan Winters.
Here.
And I believe that constitutes quorum. Next, we'll move on to review and acceptance of our minutes from last month's meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes or any changes or corrections that need to be made?
I make a motion to approve.
Second, Mark.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, abstentions? Great, we will accept the minutes from the April 1st meeting and move on to public comment. I believe we have one registered public commenter, which is Megan Confer-Hammond of the Fair Housing Partnership.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you. My name is Megan Confer-Hammond. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Partnership. I simply want to step in and let everyone know that in the past month that HUD FHEO has referred to the federal OMB office, the Obama era disparate impact and affirming furthering fair housing rules for review and potential reinstatement. And so we are continuing to see fantastic federal support for the type of initiatives that we are taking locally, and that will also provide some information and guidelines for being able to pursue these guidelines and facts and reviews as much as we can. And so I let Kelly know, and so our goal over the month of May is to truly begin, as April was Fair Housing Month, with being able to establish and create these frameworks to lay over the programs. And so, for example, between the DPCC and the HAP, with the racial inequity regarding homeownership and the de-investment in Black neighborhoods, and to view the fair housing data that can be applied, as well as to dig into the data regarding the other protected classes, including the city-specific protected classes, because those city-specific protected classes are only as viable as our enforcement of those and our pursuit of the equity that's related to those protected classes. And additionally, I raised that we can look at the RGP program. While I understand and we all know that it's gap funding, we can begin to evaluate and create the concept of a fair housing impact review or understanding for the projects that are currently at the URA, as well as to help with future understanding of proposed projects for being able to understand how it's impacting the region. Because we know for a fact that we have built a preponderance of disability and senior housing at the 1 and 2 bedroom rate, and we are seeing the market create market rate units at efficiency 1 and maybe 2 bedrooms that are not providing family units throughout the city or fully accessible family units due to the lack of elevators. And so there still is a lot of work to be done, but I am excited to dig in the month of May. And I will also raise as a last point, if you are unaware, is that a DC federal judge yesterday struck down the CDC's eviction moratorium. The DOJ has filed an appeal already on that decision, but it is a federal judge and it is concerning. And so simply to underscore the importance that we all know of this work here, because the affordable housing crisis is only going to worsen before it gets better, and our role in being the bulwark that we can. So I thank you all, and I can't wait to get started.
Thank you, Megan. Is there anyone else present who wishes to register public comment? Okay.
Kelly, I just want to note for the record that we've been joined by Adrian Walnaha, Joanna Deming, and Dr. Jamil Bey.
Thank you.
And Sonia also, I think, joined, didn't she?
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. If there's no further public comment, we'll move on to a presentation from HRNA. They have updated the housing needs assessment.
Great. This is Phil Cash from HRNA Advisors. Right, it's making see this like appreciate for the chance to get to talk today. What I'm going to go through at a high level is really what our scope is, and start to ask you all some questions about how you used the housing needs assessment previously. Next slide, please. So I'll give introductions quickly, talk through our scope, and ask you all a couple questions on how you see the assessment being used, and the next steps in our process. Next slide. So as I said, I'm Philip Cash. I'm a partner at HRNA Advisors. HRNA is a real estate, economic development, public policy consulting firm. I lead our housing practice, so I focus on affordable housing across the country. Working with Matt Bledsoe and Bailey McConnell on this, on the HRNA side. They are both out. And eHoldings, who we partner with to help us do the analysis on demographics and market conditions. Next slide. Next slide. So HRNA's experience, HRNA's affordable housing practice and background is really in doing market plans and assessments. So helping local governments, advocacy organizations, philanthropic organizations understand what market conditions are, what's happening in the market, what the existing affordable housing programs are doing, what the challenges with that are, and then how those line up. So how do your housing programs actually line up with needs in the market, and then developing recommendations on how to address it. We also help design and implement any of the recommendations that usually come out of a housing needs assessment. So revolving loan funds for preservation, inclusionary zoning, down payment assistance, single family rehab programs, almost anything you might actually recommend in a housing plan, we also design and work on. And we've done a fair amount of work in Pittsburgh, actually working with the URA to stand up the Housing Opportunity Fund, working with Hines on inclusive economic development, and are excited to continue to work in the market and understand it better. Next slide. Is anyone from eHoldings actually on? I believe you are, Amy. I believe Amy was going to join us, but I know she may have had a conflict. It looks like not. My apologies. So I will skip through this slide and not give eHoldings full background. eHoldings is a local firm that has great knowledge and has been a very helpful partner on the work so far, but we're not here with us today. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about project scope and give you all a chance to ask me some questions about that and what we're focused on, and then get into some discussion. Next slide. So the assessment is really intended to build on previous housing needs assessment and a fair amount of market different analysis that's been done by nonprofit and advocacy groups. It's going to feed into the Forging Pittsburgh overall comprehensive plan, and we're really looking at what are the demographic trends, what are the conditions of the housing supply, where are the challenges with the housing affordability, where are housing needs, so who is the market not serving, who are the existing housing programs not serving, and then understand market characteristics. There's a heavy emphasis on displacement and displacement risk. That's something that was flagged in the previous housing needs assessment, and as we started to pull information on the market, it is clearly a major challenge in the housing market and has come up in every conversation we've had. we're really trying to make this sure that as we build this housing easement, it builds on what are the employment and economic trends. So not just a snapshot in time about the current needs, but how do we think market conditions are going to progress going forward, so that we're not constantly trying to catch up with a goal that's gotten higher or more difficult. Making sure that when we think about housing, that we're looking at more than just actual unit counts, but different types of tenure, but in location and different benefits. Recognizing Pittsburgh, has housing quality issues. Again, making sure that where folks might show up housed and being able to afford that housing, we're also understanding where there are quality issues. In fact, the house is affordable, but it's not actually providing appropriate shelter for families. And then really understanding disparity and racial disparity on this. We're going to look at median numbers, we're going to look at averages, but we're going to work hard to disaggregate and make sure we don't lose the story and understand the full nuance of what's going on. And then, as was just being discussed before I started speaking, understanding how COVID has exacerbated this in the near term and how that's likely to play out, or at least starting to project how that's going to play out. Those are parts of the 2021 update, but really intended to build on the previous analysis done back in 2016. Next slide. So there's really 6 major tasks here. We have a project kickoff, which we're past and we're into the work. As you see in our project, the 6 phases this is how this presents it as if it's an extremely linear process. We will move it through it relatively linearly, but the reality is that as you review existing market programs and get into understanding the housing stock, you may have to go back and make sure you actually really understood how that repair program works, because you understand more about what's going on with single family, or you have an interview and information comes up. So again, this presents it linearly, but we intend to iterate and revise and have a series of interim deliverables that will then put together to go to the final report over to the city. And as we go through that process, we intend to make everything we're putting together public and discuss. There's always a challenge when a lot of what we're doing is about data analysis, but the data can miss the nuance of what's happening in the market. And so we always want to make sure as we're doing the analysis, we're presenting it back and making sure that it actually aligns with what people are experiencing and seeing on the ground, and is an accurate, we haven't missed the story by only looking at statistics. Next slide. So the first phase is reviewing housing programs. We're in the collection reviewing of the existing housing plans, existing neighborhood plans, but also an inventory of all the existing housing programs. So those are both the housing programs run by the URA, through the HOF and otherwise, those housing programs controlled by the city, those housing programs controlled by the housing authority, and again, back to the COVID point, more recently, the number of housing programs run at the county level that are really emergency services. This is with the goal of understanding what's out there, who's being served at different income levels, what volume of households are being served at, and how those are running, so we can start to see where the efforts, where the focus of energy is at, and as we start to have information on market and need, start to compare how does what's being done compare to where the need is, both in scale and whether some issues are being addressed or not addressed. What comes out of this is really a summary of the Housing Initiatives Report, which is an overall view of this is what we saw on the market, this is what we see in the housing program. We always want to put one of these together and share out, because there is usually a housing program or two that we've missed because it's run by through a United Way or through a nonprofit, and we're not covering it. It's an important program to cover, or we think we've gone through everything, we think we understand the programs, but in fact the program runs differently than we understand. So as we're doing with everything, we're trying to show our work and show it early, so that those who are out in the community doing this work, can correct and add and make sure we have an accurate understanding of everything. Next slide, please. Then demographics, forecasting, and economic data. This is about understanding who lives in Pittsburgh now and disaggregating that, who's coming to Pittsburgh and who's leaving Pittsburgh, and how job creation, economic trends are likely to drive that and push it forward. This is a who. This is focused on the people side. Similar approach to the program review. we're going to have there's interim memo comes out here is like, these are the population trends. This is what we're seeing. We're going to disaggregate this wherever possible at the neighborhood level, following the neighborhood boundaries set out, and want to go back and make sure the data we're pulling, flag where the data we're pulling and hear where the data we're pulling, and what we're learning in interviews does or does not align with folks' experience actually out in the neighborhoods and the community. Census data often trails, and not everybody's full participations. We're really going to see with the 2020 census. Previous censuses have been a little bit better. So we always want to make sure we're understanding that and getting a full picture. Next slide. Housing stock. So if demographics is the people side, this is more the bricks and sticks side of it. This is really about understanding what's the existing housing stock in Pittsburgh, where is it located, how does it vary by size and condition, and level of affordability. What's affordable because the market's not that strong? What's affordable because there's affordability restrictions? Where there's affordability restrictions, what income levels is that actually serving? When do those affordability restrictions actually expire? How those owned and administered? And then where's the gap between what households need and what housing is actually available in terms of affordability, but also in household size. So there's really understanding the gap at size, there's a gap at affordability, and there's a gap, not so much a gap, but a concentration. Where's the housing located and how does that line up with various measures for opportunity? And this is a thing we'll measure in a couple different ways and come back and talk to. Access to employment centers, transit, parks and recreation, school quality, and other aspects. Next slide. And then market analysis. This is really building on the stock piece of more what's being built, where, by whom, and for whom. So where is new construction or significant rehabilitation happening? Is that going to market rate? What does market rate mean in this context? Is that affordable? What does affordable mean in this context? To what degree this is rental, what is for sale? And frankly, who's ultimately doing the building and who's ultimately, to the degree we can see it, owning the asset. So are these, are developments tending to get built by a merchant builder and then flipped over to private equity after 3 to 7 years, which is not an uncommon business model, but ultimately who's ending up with control. And then again, this ends with a market analysis report, and we put out the projects we see. And this is another place where you think you know every deal in a market, and then you put out the list and show your analysis, and people show you, deals that you didn't find in your interviews, you didn't find in your conversation. So we'll again go through the process of making sure we're sharing what we're seeing and adding and refining. As I imagine some folks on this call point out, you've missed this deal, or you didn't understand this deal, or that deal is different than you think it is. And then the last step is really where, next slide, please. Thank you. The last step is really where we start to pull this together of, given the population, households in need, and given what's happening with the housing market, so what the market's actually building and where things are headed, where are there existing gaps, and where are how are those gaps likely to change over time? New gaps that may emerge, gaps that may enlarge, or even some gaps that may shrink, but shrink for the wrong reasons, because folks are like, we jokingly call it the Seattle solution, which is, I guess, not funny. Seattle is one of the few cities in America where the affordability crisis seems to be getting better, largely because they've displaced everybody over under 100,000. So making sure that we're understanding if a number appears to be solved, is that because we've actually displaced or forced people out of the community and they just don't show up in our data anymore? And coming out of this, making sure we put together a series of recommended initiatives and strategies. And those initiatives and strategies, we really look at 3 different sets of solutions. We want to recommend a comprehensive approach. So those are land use. Obviously, this is a comprehensive planning process, so land use is important, but where's land use and zoning and the regulatory process going to change what can be built where and increase the supply of housing, but also manage displacement pressure? Then subsidy, which obviously HOF understands, where you can close the gap between what a household can afford and what it costs to build or maintain housing. And then tenants' rights. How do I make sure there's appropriate balance between the rights of a tenant and rights of a landlord? Again, going back to the eviction moratorium comment made at the beginning of this. We really think that you can't have a healthy housing market without a strategy that includes land use, subsidy, and tenants' rights, because you need all of those factors to be balanced in order to really meet the needs of all your residents. So what we'll do is we'll lay out those different tools that we recommend, examples of them, and that'll lead to a matrix of and start to lay out really the strategies that we go forward for overall housing. So it won't be a detailed housing plan of detailed exactly what strategy or capital expenditures, but it will lay out, given these needs, this is the market conditions are, and these are the kinds of tools, these are the tools you need to design and put in place to help address that. I went through that extremely quickly, and I apologize for that. I'm happy to answer questions, but wanted to just give this overall. All this comes together and goes into a final report that then feeds into the overall plan. We're going to try to make that report really with two parts, like both a very technical piece and make sure we show all of our analysis so anybody can replicate what we did and frankly cut the data in other ways or monitor change over time, but also, and this is always hard on housing space, make it sure it's clear and accessible. So really thinking about almost in two ways so that folks can understand, it's very clear, like these are the key challenges and this is why this is what's happening. And here's the maps and graphs that show that. But then make sure that you all, everyone can see like, this is how we did our affordable housing census. So this is all the units that went into that. And this, if you needed to update or monitor it over time, you can. And that's where we expect to end up. Next slide. So I wanted to get into a little bit of discussion, but also happy to go back through anything I covered previously. Next slide. We're doing analysis, we're going to do this work, and we think we have some understanding of how it's going to use, but this is a planning activity, but a planning activity is only a really useful activity if it supports actual policy making and actual decisions and actions. So we would love to hear from you all. Some degree is like, how was the 2016 housing needs assessment used, or did you use it, and where was it useful? Which things would you like us, make sure we replicate and update in 2021, and then where, what else do you want to see from the 2021 plan? But really, we're asking you, like, how is this housing need? How do you think you're going to use this data, or how do you want to use it, so that we're having that top of mind whenever throughout the whole process of doing the work. I will stop talking at you, and hopefully you will have some questions and thoughts. Also happy to talk about any part of the scope.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. I think one of the ways that it got used was the Affordable Housing Task Force made a recommendation to the city to form the Housing Opportunity Fund. So it was that assessment was directly used to get a dedicated source of funding for affordable housing in the city of Pittsburgh. I think one of the perplexing, it just updating those numbers to see what the numbers of population that are in crisis, or we had a shortage of 23,000 units of affordable housing in the city. Almost all of that was in rental, but there was also a lack of affordable home ownership opportunities for families. How has that changed since the assessment was done in 2016? I think we're all aware of now some of the consequences of some of this lack of affordability is displacement of a large proportion of the Black population in Pittsburgh in the past 4 or 5 years, 6 years. Where did that happen, and why did that happen? Was that folks like the Penn Plaza being demolished and moved out of this, that the units simply went away? Are those publicly owned units like housing authority units? What are the impacts of some of the policies that the city's had for the previous couple of decades been on the population trends that we're seeing? But also, was there voluntary, folks that decided, hey, I can get it. I own my home. I can get a good price for that. I'm going to sell it. And, you know, maybe that's not an affordability issue, but it certainly would help inform or rule out causes of out-migration. And then where did folks go? You know, did they just move to a suburb of Pittsburgh where things were more affordable, or did they leave the region entirely? But those are some of the things I'd like to see, and that would sort of add on to what was done in 2016.
So just to repeat back real quick, Joanna, I see you, I'll go back. So how the gaps changed, how home ownership opportunities have shifted, and then really the scale and to the degree we can understand it, the drivers of displacement. Does
Yes.
that sound basically right?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
All right, ready? So my first thing is, will the 2020 census be able to be integrated? So will we be able to kind of wait on some pieces until that comes out and just sidebar that? Will we be able to measure, obviously we'll be able to measure whether there's less affordable units or more. So we want to see what impact, you know, HOF's made and other initiatives on closing that gap, and maybe what's exacerbated the issue. You know, we added all these units, but we lost these units. And then my last question was about multifamily units. And if we were to kind of quantify the number of multifamily units that are kind of coming onto the market and that are potential for being preserved as naturally occurring affordable housing. So just kind of quantifying those multifamily properties, especially ones that are more affordable to be acquired and potentially rehabbed.
Muted myself, sorry. So the question on the 2020 census, we are starting with 2019 census data. We are looking to be able to pull in and update where appropriate. To be direct, we're a little nervous about the 2020 census data. And so we're not waiting for it, but we are going to look at it, and if it's different, pull it in. So if it changes the story, we're going to pull it in and make adjustments. And that's not 100% complete, decisive answer, but we're just very unsure what the 2020 census data is actually going to give us. On the gaps, I think, you know, similar comments I hear on the inflow and the outflow. I also hear you saying understanding what's going on with your NOAA and what that property is, and whether there's a preservation, like whether it makes sense for there to be a preservation fund or a preservation play to both improve and protect quality, and also prevent, you know, limit market pressure. Is that, am I hearing that right?
Yeah, quantifying that opportunity. Mm-hmm.
Got it. That's clear.
Good morning. I have another question. Will this report also highlight the role of short-term rentals like Airbnb and the impact that plays on the market as it relates to affordable housing, homeownership opportunities, as well as affordable rentals?
We have not flagged that as a focus area, but we have done that analysis in other markets, and we can. There's some data sources out there where we can actually get, there's some data sources that are actually really designed to help people who want to start their own short-term rental business, that give you good data on where the units are at, how many there are, and what they're renting for. And we can get a size on that. I guess, you know, I know you asked the question for a reason. And other places when we've done it, so we did some analysis on this in New Orleans, where it was a major problem in the Tremaine neighborhood. Are there, you know, well, I'm sure I'll see this to some degree in the data, but do you already have a feel that like there are certain neighborhoods or certain places in the city where this is becoming an issue?
I'm not quite certain as far as the neighborhood that it might be an issue in. However, I have heard from some real estate agents who are trying to help 60 to 80% AMI residents purchase homes in the city. The challenge they've run into because of the lack of availability due to investors purchasing homes just for Airbnb. So, you know, Just looking at that, like the market that may be open for, that are being purchased right now for investment opportunities versus low to moderate income homeownership opportunities, as well as rental.
So I'm gonna dig on this for a minute, because I want us to do more. It might be helpful just for us to talk about if there's real estate agents you think are good to talk to, because one of the things we try to understand in a market, so we do work in Detroit, and one of the challenges there is because a lot of the neighborhoods are depressed in value, mortgage financing, either you can't get mortgage financing if you're a low or moderate income household, or you can't win a bid because the guy, whoever you're bidding against, has got cash. And we can pull HMDA data and look at the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, and that'll give us somewhat of a picture of what's going on. But we may just need to have more qualitative discussions, because it's sometimes hard to parse out how that's playing out neighborhood by neighborhood.
Got it.
But that's helpful to understand.
I know you mentioned this, but I just kind of want to just say that I'm especially interested in housing stock research about the quality of housing stock, and perhaps to that point, to build off of what Knowledge was saying, is who can afford to rehab in these communities where we are trying to avoid displacement. And it's oftentimes not the residents, especially given the structure of rehab loans. So if we can get a good read on the need and where that need is, maybe we can develop some better programming around that to support homeowners and prevent displacement, so that we can help people to stay in their neighborhoods. And then a second semi-related point is affordability. We know broadly means just the percentage of your income. So while our focus and our target is on helping low and moderate income folks, there are a lot of people, I'm just curious about affordability more broadly. Who is spending more than 30% of their income on housing needs? And if we can just broaden the scope or make sure that it's included, even though it's not necessarily the focus, that would be something that I'd be interested in, especially given our wage disparities that we know we have, especially by race here in the city, that would be something that I'd be interested in seeing as well.
So 2 parts that I'm hearing there is, one, who's able to reinvest in their properties, both who's able to access financing and who's able just has cash. We're going to look at 2 data sources on that. One will be the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, and it'll tell us where are my rehab loans happening. And the other will be building permit data, because not everybody uses a loan. Sometimes people use cash, and that'll give us a feel for both the scale and the location of it. It won't be perfect, because frankly, not everyone gets their permits. But it usually gives us a good indicator. And we do see, massive amounts of disparity in most cities. And I think there's a comment, Mark made a comment, which I think is a very important comment for us in Novella earlier, about where homeowners choose to sell and value, get the value and leave, and what that means, and where people are forced out. One of the things we run into, and I think Kelly, your question will get asked a little bit, is when you're selling, if you're able to improve your property before you sell it, you get the full value. If you're not able to access the financing to improve your property, you actually don't get, you might sell and move away, but you don't get nearly as much of the premium on the appreciation. And so we'll try to understand that and be able to give you. Yep.
So I think that's a part of it, but not the entire thing. Because what I'm also looking at is where there is, or want to look at, is where there are properties that should be fixed or could be fixed, but maybe there's not the rehab loans or the permits being pulled, because either you can do it cash, or you're just waiting. Like, oh, well, I know that this community may be next, and I'm just going to wait and buy it and rehab it later. And that's a lot of what I've been seeing as well, in areas where I'll just randomly look on Airbnb. I'm like, what's happening? To Knowledge's point, is sometimes people will buy rehab and then sit on it as an Airbnb while waiting for the neighborhood to really explode. But I'm thinking, if we could target, say, hey, we know that this area has a lot of low to moderate income folks who live here, and a lot of housing stock that also needs to be repaired. So is there a program that we could create to help them stay here and take advantage of ownership opportunities and potentially rehab their communities and live in their homes, versus just looking at who's actually doing the flipping or rehabbing as it is being processed, kind of like getting in front of it a little bit so we can support that. So it's not, wow, I stayed here for, however many years. And now when I go to buy, I have to spend 200 or get all these loans in order to buy a property that's been rehabbed, that I've been staring at falling apart for years and years and years. So if we can find those opportunities in advance, that's something that I would really be excited about.
That's helpful to understand.
So your comment earlier, your reference earlier to Seattle really made me start to think about affordability more broadly. While our focus as the Housing Opportunity Fund is primarily on low moderate income individuals, and though we have a little bit of flexibility in that for sale space, I'm curious as to whether and to what extent the city has this sort of missing middle problem. Do we have, are we losing the ability for more average income or people at 100% of median to actually afford homes here? Are we seeing in the housing market the income and wealth disparities that other places are seeing? A little bit outside of what our focus would be as a committee, but it's definitely an interest.
So that is definitely part of what we'll look at, and generally where we see that play out, and I don't want, like, we're looking at data, I don't want to prejudge, but where we see that playing out is, I call your middle income or lower middle income homeowners, those rates dropping, and dropping because folks are moving, folks are passing away or whatever, that cycle is coming. Usually those are longer 10-year households, and they're just not being a lot of stock or new entry options for other low and moderate income households. Right. And so we will look at that and try to understand what's happening there. I don't want to prejudge the data, but that is the trend. Like, every city I've looked at in America has seen a sharp drop in that group since foreclosure crisis and almost no recovery, which doesn't make it something we should not try to push back against, but I will be shocked if I don't see that at a significant scale when we look closely at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, agreed.
On that happy note, any other questions or comments? Sorry to.
Philip, this is Diamante. I guess the one thing that I would want to see, to Mark's earlier point, is the last time we got this data, it created the Housing Opportunity Fund. I would really like to understand how we can position the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board to sort of, I think we've been asking for this for a while, to be more strategic and to be less reactive in doing just-in-time approvals for deals as they emerge. Is there a way to take this data and then help us to rethink more holistically, how do we better inform policy and positioning, and are the programs that we created 3 years ago addressing where we are given the new data that's coming out? I'd love to see us think more in 5 and 10-year blocks. I know there's only 8 years left on the Housing Opportunity Fund drawdown from the real estate transfer tax, but I'd really like to maximize those 8 years and be thoughtful about how we really increase the sustainability of naturally occurring affordable housing. I think that we also need to be thinking about blight remediation as a part of this. We are losing critical assets that, if there were some sort of intervention, some of these issues that we see might not be as pervasive, particularly in the neighborhoods that we know need the most intervention. So I really want to figure out, how do we use the data to make better decisions and to shape programming that's really going to have the impact that will say that this endeavor of investing $120 million into affordable housing moved the data needle.
That's clear. I think the housing needs assessment will set up the foundation for it. I think we'll need to do a little building on it to actually get into like those 5 and 10-year blocks, but this should give you, hey, this is like, okay, we're talking about NOAA, we're talking about buildings that are 10 to 40 units and were built in the 50s. And like, here's the basic profile. So if we were going to do a NOAA play, you need a program that goes after these kinds of buildings. And, you know, it probably won't be one type of buildings, but a couple different types of buildings that do that. I think that'll make it, hopefully, you know, I know the HOF has it's a hard job because you have funding, but there's a lot more need than funding, but hopefully we can give you some, this will be good. Like, here's some areas of great need and here's some areas where you can have some bang for your buck.
Thank you.
So this is, you know, we'll be available, you know, obviously coming back and having more conversations as we go through it. If there are people you think we should be speaking to, if there are reports or news articles that you think we should, like, we think we're scouring everything, but maybe we were happy to get the same article, the same report multiple times, or if there are issues that come up that you just want us to make sure we're keeping in mind, we certainly appreciate getting it. And as we have, you know, as we broke this into segments, as I said before, because we know we got to share those out and we got to get feedback, make sure we're getting the full story. And sometimes we're going to tell you we don't have, like, we think that's a real thing, but we don't have data that lets us see it. But we don't want to ignore those things or pretend they're not there. We just because we can't see them doesn't mean they're not a problem. So we're going to try to, we welcome being challenged or pushed on that stuff, because, you know, data can make you blind sometimes to reality. Look forward to working with you. Yep,
I have
sorry,
a question. Yes, so I got kicked off, so I wasn't here for most of the discussion, but I think I can glean where you guys are. So will, coming out of this, considering our housing crisis and how we need to be moved of will
Eric, we can't hear you.
can you hear me?
You're going in and out.
Okay. Let me try this one more time. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm always thinking of, as looking at our affordable housing crisis and how many units we need, how we can attack this issue at scale. So will your recommendations or findings look at ways to say, if we pair this solution along with other things that we're doing, we can move the needle in a much more comprehensive way? Do you guys look at things along that nature?
Yes. So yes, but I want to acknowledge the limitations on it. We look at both. We try to look at it comprehensively. So, you know, you can't solve this. I pick on DC because I live in DC. Like, you can't solve this with just subsidy. We do over $100 million in local money annually, and things are still getting worse. But we don't do the things we should do on tenants' rights or land use. So we're going to try to talk about, this is where the subsidy piece fits in. This is how that could actually, like, you compare that with land use and regulation, you know, what you're allowing to build and where. And this is where tenants' rights fit in, so that we can talk about how those pieces fit together. And so I think that lets you talk more at scale. I will also say that my experience, and I expect this to be true in Pittsburgh, is the scale of the problem is an order of magnitude, if not more, larger than the scale of the solutions that are currently on the table in most places. And so I don't mean that to be depressing, because I think there's a lot more that can be done. And I think there's a lot of increase in impact, but also, you know, if we're talking about a 20,000 unit gap and we look at what that's going forward and it's growing, I think a lot of places there's a question about whether we can even keep up with the pace that things are growing at, much less make positive progress. And so we are going to try to put that truth out and talk about it, not in a way to be depressing, but put that, you know, if that's the truth we find, we're going to try to say it, be clear about it. It's like you're doing a scale program, which is great, and it's doing 500 units a year, and things are getting worse by about 1,000 units a year. So that means you're not keeping pace.
Correct. And I was thinking solutions beyond subsidy. So, you know, financial institutions, et cetera. So I was thinking beyond, you know, the public sources.
So we will look at funding sources beyond public sources. I think where our housing plans, where I think that the set of solutions we won't look at that I do think are really important, will acknowledge, is we won't look at the income. We won't look at the income side of it. So there's like affordability is about the price of housing, but there's also about what household income. And there's a lot of important work on, frankly, minimum wage and employment opportunity and wealth creation that we don't ever want to be dismissive of, but we're more on the cost side, on the housing cost side focused for this, and just acknowledge that like that is, we will look at all kinds of different funding sources. So as well as tenants' rights and subsidy, but we generally don't get into the income side, but we'll acknowledge its importance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
It's an important question.
Philip, is it possible for you to leave some contact information in the chat? So
Sure,
if
I'll drop it in the chat right now.
anyone wanted to follow up from this, that they have your information, or whoever we need to be chatting with?
Yeah, I will. How do I drop messages in here?
Probably can't do that with the public Zoom, I'm guessing.
I will send it out in an email and make sure it's circulated to everyone with my full contact information. If I ask you to contact me, but you don't have my contact information, it's not very fair option.
Philip, I can send it out to the advisory board, your email address.
Great. Happy for everyone to have that. If I'm ever not responsive, it's because I've missed an email, and just email me again. And if you need to use caps, you won't hurt my feelings. I apologize when I don't respond quickly. But definitely want to talk to everybody. Next slide. I don't think we're going to need to go through this, but I want to just state it because I think it'll be something we get into next. Affordable housing, and you all have gotten at this in your questions, is a really broad term that means a bunch of different things. And we're going to try to acknowledge the different issues within that. And you all have talked about that in your questions, but I just want to, we have it in here, but you're a much more sophisticated group than some of the groups we're talking to about housing issues. And we often use this to make sure that when people say affordable housing, we're all talking about specific public policy problems, the same problems. And so these are not all, but some of the related problems that would come up with affordable housing. And we're going to try to draw these distinctions in the report. Next slide. And yeah, this is just kind of laying them out. I guess recognizing that I've used up most of your time, but are there well, I actually think you guys have largely already asked this, but I don't know if there's anyone largely already answered this, but if there are particular affordability challenges that you think Pittsburgh is facing, I'd be curious, to hear that now, but also think I've heard pretty clearly some of the gentrification and displacement issues and some of the long-term rental affordability and some of the homeownership points, but there might be others.
I think access to opportunity is a huge issue. We don't see that much in Pittsburgh. We see low-income housing tax credits typically are in low and moderate income neighborhoods. We don't talk very much about those with family, family-sized projects. We'll see sort of one-bedroom units that get developed in higher opportunity neighborhoods where, but we don't see a lot of multi-bedroom units that get developed there. So I think that access to opportunity is an important piece of affordability, because you should be able to walk to get to the grocery store, to be able to get to high quality schools. And that's not always the case with the types of units that we develop and where we develop them in Pittsburgh.
That's helpful to understand. I think something we can look at to some degree. Are there others that jump out at folks that we haven't discussed?
Well, on that same point about access, I think transit tends to be public transit tends to be a bigger issue in LMI neighborhoods, and be interested to see that called out.
Okay, we can definitely look at transit access and then where the affordable housing is at. As you all know, walking in Pittsburgh is more difficult to map than most places. Normally we can do a quarter-acre circle or a half-acre circle. I'm sorry, half-mile circle, but the terrain in Pittsburgh makes that a little more complicated.
Philip, I don't know if this is within your catchment or your scope, but I'm thinking about publicly owned land and where those assets are and how they might be leveraged for the creation of affordable housing.
To the degree there is already a good data set on publicly owned land, I think we can thread that in. My experience is that the data sets on publicly owned land aren't very good. In fact, because they're usually owned by a bunch of different public entities, and like getting clear on where the land is and what land is really surplus and what land is actually being used is challenging. But I think we're happy to take a look at like what data is available and at least what we can start to say about that, because it certainly is important.
We've started working on some of this, so happy to share anything that might be useful, but that may be helpful.
Yeah.
To kind of look at what's owned publicly.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
There's some decent data too, I think, that's mapped out with the Western PA Data Center. They've got, and it tends to be URA owned or 3 taxing body owned properties. And then there's a little bit of city owned stuff, but I think there's decent data on that. It'll get you 90% of the way there. Question then, though, with a lot of that is the topography and is it buildable? So it's important to look at the overlay of the zoning on that stuff.
Public land that's not buildable is not as useful. Yep. Okay. So you said there's a Western PA data set on that. So we will work from that, and Diamante will be in touch with you as well and can try to pull that in.
Do you guys consider opportunities to partner with other large landowners that are focused on these kinds of issues, such as religious institutions and or universities?
We certainly recognize that as a program solution. I don't know that we'll come out of this and say, we'll acknowledge that as a solution. I don't think we'll be able to come out of this and say, you should talk with, here are 3 to 4 leads on that front. So I think acknowledging it is an important strategy. Yes, being able to give good guidance on who you should talk to and where you should go with that, probably beyond where we're going to get. Does that answer your question? Are there other questions? Recognizing I've taken more time, I think, than I was originally allocated. Happy to hand it back and appreciate everyone's time on it. Well, I look forward to speaking with you all again, and thank you.
Kelly, did you have anything to say after that, or do we want to get right into voting agenda?
My internet dropped out for a minute, so I don't have anything.
Me too.
I disappeared for a minute. So I'm back in. If nobody has any other comments, I guess we can move on to the voting items of the agenda.
All right. Good morning, everyone. First item for voting are 3 contracts for Roofathon. Roofathon is underway and continue through the end of June. We're replacing roofs and other critical repairs for 25 low to moderate income households. The contractors we're partnering with this year are ones we've worked with in the past through the Homeowner Assistance Program. Concrete Rose is a minority and women-owned company. Of the homeowners that we are assisting with this initiative, 48% are Black, 40% white, 40% of households are also at or below 30% AMI. 44% of the households are 30 to 50% AMI, and the rest are 50 to 80%. Of the 25 households, 76% are female head of households. And so this year's Roofathon is being funded through a mix of HOF 2019 and HOF 2020. The homeowners were selected from the current waiting list who identified as having a roof issue. We're asking for authorization to enter into contracts with these 3 contractors for Roofathon.
I make a motion to approve the contracts with the 3 selected contractors for Roofathon.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed, abstentions? Okay, so the motion to approve the Roofathon contracts for the HAP program.
I have a
passes.
question. I
Sure.
have a question. So Jeremy, I know in the past, I think last year, we couldn't do as many roofs because we didn't, have enough contractors. Do you guys still need more contractors?
So likely, we are watching stimulus funding. And so if it does look like we will be able to use some stimulus funding to ramp up this program, we will need contractors and we will likely do an RFP. As of right now, we're okay, but if we do get more funding, we will need more contractors and likely contractors that are lead certified.
Okay.
If Derek,
just-
if we do an RFP for contractors, it'll come through the advisory board.
So with, $750,000 or so that we're putting out here, or 800,000, whatever that adds up to, how many roofs will get done?
25. It's $750,000, 25,000, 25 projects, 30,000 at each project.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. I guess since we already voted on this, we could begin discussing the broader HAP program agenda item.
Next. Okay, so we also have a few increases to current HAP contracts. Hilltop Alliance is getting an increase from unallocated funds out of HOF 2020. They spent down or committed all of their existing funding, and this will allow them to assist for additional projects. OPDC is getting an increase of 200,000 out of HOF 2019 because, again, they've spent down or committed their 2018 allocation. Similarly, this will allow them to assist at least 5 more projects. Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh is an increase of 200,000 out of HOF 2021 because they spent down all previous 2018, 2019, and 2020 contracts. This will allow them to assist at least 5 more projects. And Concrete Rose and Spanbar are getting contract increases to continue assisting our HAP Plus homeowners. Those are homeowners 50 to 80% AMI. They've spent down their existing contracts, and this will allow them to complete at least another 21 projects. Authorization today is to increase all of these contracts for homeowner assistance program.
I have a question. Are these contracts expected just to address folks still on the waiting list, or is this going to allow opening of new applications?
Yep, this will be to address people that are still on the existing waiting list.
Do we know how many people are on the waiting list?
Derek or Doran, if you have easy access, I think it's just under 90. And then we'll talk about reopening the waiting list a little bit later in the meeting.
So we need to make a motion. I'll make a motion to increase the HAP contracts by the following: listed Hilltop Alliance by 150,000, Oakland Planning Development Corporation by 200,000, Rebuilding Together, Pittsburgh by 200,000, Concrete Roads by 300,000, Spanbar Construction by 350,000, all to be sourced by different HAP years. I don't know if that's a good. I don't know if I need to re-say that, but I was just trying to make the motion and move forward.
It works.
Okay, cool.
Second, Derek.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. Next, we move on to the Housing Stabilization Program. And again, with contract increases.
Thank you,
I
Kelly.
suppose it's good that we have good demand and people lined up to meet demand, I think is the bright side of increasing these contracts.
Absolutely. The YWCA is getting $200,000 increase out of HOF 2018 and a little bit of Pittsburgh Foundation funding to allow them to administer the rental assistance program, HSP, for residents who are getting legal assistance. So later I'll announce that we are going to launch the legal assistance programs out of HOF on Monday. The YWCA is the partner organization that will issue rental assistance for people who are concurrently seeking legal assistance so that we can streamline the process for those residents. Goodwill is also getting an increase from unallocated funds out of HOF 2018 as they've made good progress spending down their existing HOF contract. Any questions?
You said this will start on Monday?
Yeah.
That's exciting. Thanks for all the hard work you've done on this, by the way.
I have a great team. Can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. We have increased these contracts. Next to some advisory board administrative items. The first one would be committee updates, but so far we've only created one committee that was unable to meet in the month of April. And there's a doodle out, which I think everybody should have seen, to go ahead and schedule that special session. Contracting guidelines so that we can move towards this scoring system that we had talked about before. And so if everybody can fill that out, we can report out on how that special session went in our June meeting. Wow, like it's May already. And I don't know if anybody else has any other administrative items or things they want to share about committees or anything of that nature. So this would be a good opportunity. No, okay. Back to programmatic expenditures and impacts then.
I guess this is awkward because Jessica usually went through these. So Kelly, if you would like staff to, we can. Otherwise, it's up to you how you want this to go.
Oh, please, by all means, you or someone from your team, whoever's comfortable.
Sure.
Thank you.
Down payment closing costs is continuing to try to keep up with the demand of home buyers. Still seeing a very, very active market right now, but still averaging about 10 closings a month here. Next. Homeowner assistance program that we talked about. Most of the funding is committed, but in the last couple of months, we've really seen construction really pick up. So we're in a really good place right now with construction projects, almost all of them being active right now. So doing good there. Not much. Nothing really new here, other than to tell you that going forward, the team is going to work on modifying the visualization here to be more clear on kind of how many units are attributed to each of these dots. So it doesn't look like one dot is one project, but one dot could be 100 units. So staff are going to work on the visualization for the next meeting. Not much new here, just showing the spending we're at this point. Okay. All right, Bettina.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So we wanted to start the discussion on the HOF 2022 annual allocation plan. So starting this month and moving forward until December, we'll just be providing an update on where we are at with the 2022 annual allocation plan. So next month, we're looking, or actually later this month, we're looking to issue an RFP on community outreach and to hire firms to do the community outreach to get feedback. Starting in June and July, we're looking to collect the feedback. We want to make sure we have enough time to allocate, to solicit the feedback, to make sure that we have enough time to analyze it well ahead of the December City Council final approval. But this is the timeline that we are proposing. Again, we want to have these discussions early and well ahead of time so that we do allocate enough time, just because it seems like we're always kind of rushing through this process. So this is kind of our milestones that we want to meet and the dates in the HOF advisory board meetings where we would like to have the draft plans by and final approvals by. So every advisory board meeting will just be providing a brief update moving forward. Does anyone have any questions?
I just want to build on that, Bettina, just a little bit, because it's been such a wild year for funding, and just want to let the advisory board know we do have our eyes on the American Rescue Plan and whatever might come out of infrastructure bill. But, as that could, play an impact in the allocation funding, depending on what funding we have for housing projects, we will keep you updated on that so that you can be well informed of what other resources we might possibly have in relation to HLF funding.
Any questions for the URA team on the announcements or on the previous slides?
Was there, maybe I've missed it? Were we, I know it's not on the agenda, but I thought I saw something about appraisal contracts in one of the attachments, or am I getting something mixed up here?
What was it, Mark?
Appraisal contracts that maybe I pulled something up, but I thought it was something that
No, you're right, Mark. It didn't make it on the actual slide deck. That's on me. So if I can, Kelly, add a walk-on item to the agenda.
Absolutely.
All right, so it is in relation to the appraisal packets that the board did receive. That is to increase existing contracts with our two appraisers who do appraisals for all of the HAP projects. They've just kind of spent down their contracts, and we just need to increase it to keep the appraisals going.
I guess I would ask, what's the point of doing the appraisals? Is URA or somebody going to foreclose if some condition isn't there? Or like, why do we care?
Because it's how we get paid back. So we take the appraisal at closing, and then there's an appraisal when they sell or transfer the house. Based on the difference of that appraisal, calculates how much the URA gets paid back.
I guess I forgot the details of it. I just, that's fine.
The appraisal fee is not added to the homeowner's cost.
No, I understand it. It's just, that's a different discussion, I guess, about program design and how we're doing this stuff.
So the voting items is a $30,000 increase for John Dew Dash and a $30,000 increase for Bodner Real Estate Services.
Just question for clarity, the appraisal is in reference to the HAP program?
Correct.
Okay.
And again, this is strictly to ascertain the beginning value. It has nothing to do with whether somebody gets approved for the loan or not.
That's correct.
So kind of back to our earlier data questions. Are we tracking the increase in value of the home from before and after our investment, and like what the impact that would be on a community?
I think there's probably a mechanism to do that, but we're only in our third operational year, and I don't think anyone has sold their house. So we can talk to our data team on how we can try to track that, but there's just been, very, very little or almost none activity there of people selling the house right after we fix it.
So I'm not even thinking necessarily in terms of on the resale. I'm just thinking if we invest, say, $50,000 into my house and now it's worth $100,000 more, that has an effect on my surrounding market. And just thinking if we're checking that, even if we're just going back with like Zillow or Redfin or something that's not really, to just kind of keep an eye on what our activities may or may not be doing to shift an individual market or support it, or I don't know. That's just something that I'm thinking about as we're talking about appraisals, is that the increase or decrease in any individual house. I remember, I grew up in East Lib. The first time somebody sold a house for $100,000, in our neighborhood, it was a huge deal. And then now we know where we are like 15 years later. But just kind of keeping an eye on that sort of thing and wondering if that's something we would be able to track or interested in tracking.
So if it's something the advisory board wants us to track, we can certainly look into it, but we would just need to be very clear what we're tracking, because if you want to know the appraisal, comparing that to something on Zillow or even the county real estate is not going to be comparable. We could do comparisons on assessments, but just knowing there's often a big difference between assessment and appraisal.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how we would do that. It's just something that I would be interested in us looking at. But we can figure that out later. I was just curious as to whether or not that was something we were currently reviewing. I'm sorry, Jeremy, I don't know if there are any other questions, but if not, if you could repeat what it is that you need us to make a motion on, that would be great.
No problem. The voting item is $30,000 increase for John Dudash and a $30,000 increase for Bodnar Real Estate.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second Adrienne Wanaha.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we've got a motion to add $60,000 to those two vendors for appraisals for the HAP program. Thanks for catching that, Mark.
And I did want to touch on the announcements. I was trying to, but then my screen froze. So the legal assistance programs, very excited to announce that those will be operational Monday, May 10th. The URA will send out a press release and we will distribute flyers to the advisory board so you can help spread the word. We have 5 great providers with us. We have coordinated entry set up, and we have a pretty good system of tracking data and trends within this program to be able to report back out on how the program is doing. So as a reminder, we have 5 different legal services available. For tenants, we have mediation, limited legal consultation, and full representation. For homeowners, we have tangle title and foreclosure prevention services. Then, as I referred to earlier on, the homeowner assistance program waiting list is reopening May 24th. So please spread the word because we have been closed new applications for the past 8 or 9 months. We will only be able to accept and fund about 60 applications, 65 applications. So we will accept applications through June 24th, but we will not accept any applications prior to May 24th. The applications will be available on our website starting May 24th. And then we also want to announce that we did execute a contract with Binoms Marketing and Communication as the marketing firm to produce a 2020 annual report. And can already tell you that just the first design concepts, they are looking quite wonderful. So pretty excited to see how this is going to turn out. And then, of course, the next advisory board will be Thursday, June 3rd. Next slide. Just want to, again, show housing resources. ERAP is still accepting applications. And then, of course, now we can show that another housing resource, the legal assistance programs, will be available. And again, we'll send the flyer out to the advisory board, which will have all of the contact information, how someone can get a referral. And lastly, we would very much be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity, even though Jessica's not on, to really celebrate and congratulate Jessica on 20 amazing years of public service to the URA. You know, I think all everyone on the board knows how much impact Jessica has made. And we wish her well at PHFA in Harrisburg. But thank you, Jessica, for your thought leadership and everything you've done for the city of Pittsburgh. Back to you, Kelly.
Yes, no, we'll certainly miss Jessica and her contributions. She was, you know, wonderful to work with in a lot of different capacities. And, you know, at PHFA, I'm sure she'll be continuing the good fight, and we certainly wish her well in Harrisburg. And if there are no further comments or questions, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great. I don't think we need to A and nay on this. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in a little under a month.
Everybody.
Good job, Kelly.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.